The sky over Tokyo burned red on the morning of March 10, 1945. Captain James Dutch Schultz gripped the yoke of his B-29 Superfortress, call sign Liberty Bell, as the massive bomber climbed through 28,000 feet. Around him, stretched across the pale dawn sky, flew 334 sister ships, the largest incendiary raid ever launched against the Japanese homeland. Below, the city sprawled like a canvas of wood and paper, waiting for fire. Dutch was 26 years old. He had a wife named Eleanor back in Ohio and a daughter he'd only seen in photographs. He'd flown 17 missions over Japan. This was supposed to be his 18th. Flak at 10 o'clock, called out Lieutenant Bobby Hernandez from the bombardier's position in the nose. His voice crackled through the intercom, steady but tight. Dutch saw it, black flowers blooming in the sky, each one a lethal burst of Japanese anti-aircraft fire. The 88mm shells were coming up in patterns, staggered altitude spreads designed to shred anything that flew through them. Intelligence had said the defenses would be lighter at this hour. Intelligence had been wrong. Pilot to crew, tighten up. We're going in. The B-29 was a technological marvel. 4 Wright R-3350 engines, each producing 2,200 horsepower, driving the 60-ton machine through air so thin a man couldn't breathe it. The pressurized cabin kept them alive. The plexiglass nose gave Hernandez a god's-eye view of the target. The bomb bay carried 6 tons of M69 incendiary clusters, each one designed to stick, burn, and spread. They called it strategic bombing. They called it total war. Dutch called it hell. The formation tightened as they approached the initial point. Through breaks in the clouds, Dutch could see Tokyo spreading beneath them. Districts, rivers, bridges, factories. And people. Always people. He didn't think about that. Couldn't think about that. IP in 30 seconds, Hernandez announced. Behind Dutch, in the Top Gun turret, Sergeant Mike O'Connor rotated his twin .50 caliber machine guns, scanning for fighters. The Japanese had been throwing everything at them lately. Zeros, Toyos, even kamikaze pilots willing to ram a bomber to bring it down. Steady, steady. Hernandez was lining up the Norden bomb sight now, the sophisticated analog computer that would, theoretically, drop their payload within 100 feet of the target. The flak intensified. A burst exploded 200 yards to port, close enough that Liberty Bell shuddered. Then another, starboard side, closer. The Japanese gunners were walking their fire across the formation, searching, hunting. Flak vest, Dutch muttered to his co-pilot, Lieutenant Gary Mitchell. Both men were already wearing them, 30 pounds of overlapping steel plates that might stop shrapnel, might not. Christ, they're everywhere, Mitchell said, watching the black bursts multiply across their path. Bomb bay doors opening, Hernandez called out. The hydraulic motors whined. The belly of the bomber split open. The freezing stratospheric air rushed in, dropping the cabin temperature 40 degrees in seconds. Through the sudden gap, the incendiaries waited, innocent-looking clusters that would unleash liquid fire across 10,000 square feet each. Doors open. On target. 15 seconds. Dutch held the yoke steady. This was the worst part, flying straight and level through a sky full of explosions, giving the bombardier his stable platform, giving the enemy gunners their perfect target. The B-29 couldn't evade, couldn't turn, couldn't do anything but fly into the storm and pray. 10 seconds. A burst exploded directly ahead. Liberty Bell punched through the smoke, and Dutch felt something hit the fuselage, a metallic clang that resonated through the airframe. 5 seconds. Another burst. Closer. The bomber to their right, call sign Memphis Bell 2, took a direct hit. The entire right wing separated in a spray of aluminum and fire. The fuselage tumbled, spinning down through the formation, and Dutch watched 16 men fall 6 miles to their deaths. Bombs away. The clusters tumbled free. Liberty Bell lurched upward, suddenly lighter. The bay doors began to close. "Let's get the hell out of here," Dutch said, already banking left, starting the turn that would take them away from the target, away from the flak, away from... The explosion happened without warning. A Japanese 88mm shell, fired from a battery near the Sumida River, detonated 18 feet from Liberty Bell's left wing. The blast was catastrophic. Shrapnel, thousands of white-hot metal fragments, scythed through the wing structure like a shotgun blast through paper. The entire outboard section, everything from the No. 1 engine to the wingtip, disintegrated. Fuel tanks ruptured. Hydraulic lines severed. The No. 1 engine, its cowling shredded, immediately burst into flames. The No. 2 engine, hit by multiple fragments, began windmilling, its propeller auto-rotating uselessly. Liberty Bell rolled violently left. "We're hit!" Mitchell screamed. "Jesus Christ, we're hit!" Dutch fought the yoke, every muscle straining. The bomber wanted to spiral, wanted to flip inverted and dive. The left wing was gone, just gone. He could see blue sky through holes the size of dinner plates. The aluminum skin had been peeled back like foil. Internal structure, ribs, spars, stringers, hung exposed, trailing smoke and flame. "Fire in No. 1. O'Connor shouted from the turret. "Wings burning." The flames were already spreading, eating their way inboard toward the fuselage, toward the center fuel tanks, toward oblivion. Dutch's mind raced through options. They were too far from base. Too far from any American-held territory. Below was Tokyo, 40 million tons of fire about to consume the city, and enemy territory for 1,000 miles in every direction. They couldn't bail out, not over Japan. The civilians would tear them apart. He'd heard the stories. They couldn't ditch, the Pacific was freezing, and they'd have minutes in the water. They had to fly. Mitchell, firewall the other engines. Full power. Dutch the wing. Do it. Mitchell shoved the throttles forward. The 3 remaining engines, No. 2 sputtering, No. 3 and 4 screaming, responded. The bomber shuddered, fighting against its own aerodynamics, against gravity, against physics itself. Liberty Bell began to climb. The fire spread across the shredded wing like a living thing, hungry and fast. Black smoke poured back over the fuselage. Inside the cabin, the temperature spiked. The smell of burning metal and aviation fuel filled their throats. "Crew, this is Pilot," Dutch said, his voice somehow steady. "We're going to make it. Understand? We're going to make it." Nobody answered. Below, Tokyo began to burn. The incendiaries were hitting now, thousands of them, and fires were sprouting across the wooden districts like weeds after rain. The smoke was already rising to meet them, a column of black and gray that would eventually reach 20,000 feet. Liberty Bell climbed through the flak, burning and broken, held together by courage and desperation and the stubborn refusal of one pilot to let his crew die over enemy territory. The real fight was just beginning. 3 minutes after the hit, Liberty Bell was still flying. Barely. Dutch had the yoke pulled back so far his arms trembled. The bomber climbed at a pathetic 200 feet per minute, a fraction of its normal rate, and every second felt like defying God himself. The left wing, or what remained of it, was a skeletal horror. Through the torn metal and exposed framework, he could see the internal structure flexing with each gust of wind, bending in ways aluminum was never meant to bend. The fire had grown. What started as flames around the No. 1 engine had spread inboard, consuming hydraulic fluid, insulation, wiring. The wing was a torch, and they were flying it. "Dutch, we've lost hydraulic pressure," Mitchell said, his voice higher than normal, fighting panic. "Ailerons are sluggish. We're down to manual reversion on the rudder." "I feel it." Dutch did. The controls felt like they were moving through mud. Every input required twice the force, and Liberty Bell responded like a drunk walking a tightrope. "Engineering to pilot," crackled Staff Sergeant Ray Wilson's voice from the aft section. Fires reached the number 2 fuel tank. I can see it through the inspection window. If that tank goes. How long? Silence. Then, 5 minutes. Maybe less. Can you dump fuel? Dump valves on the wing. Wings on fire, Dutch. Then we burn until we don't. Stay on it, Ray. In the tail gun position, 20-year-old Airman First Class Tommy Chun watched the Japanese coastline recede behind them. The formation, what was left of it, was scattered across 50 miles of sky, each bomber racing for the safety of the Pacific. They'd left 12 aircraft over Tokyo. 12 crews. 192 men who wouldn't see home again. Tail gun to pilot, we've got company. Dutch's stomach dropped. Fighters. 2 contacts, 7 o'clock high. Coming fast. Of course. The Japanese always sent fighters after damaged bombers. Wounded animals were easy prey. Crew, we've got bandits incoming. Gunners, call your shots. Make every round count. The Japanese fighters were Ki-84 Hayats, Franks in American intelligence parlance. Fast, maneuverable, deadly. Each one carried 2 20mm cannons and 2 heavy machine guns. Against a crippled B-29, they were apex predators stalking a dying elephant. O'Connor spotted them first from the top turret. Got visual. Franks, diving from 4 o'clock. Waist guns, track left. Dutch ordered. In the waist gun positions, Sergeants Eddie Kowalski and James Doc Morrison swung their .50 calibers toward the threat. The guns were mounted in clear plexiglass blisters, giving them panoramic views and making them feel terribly exposed. The lead Frank came in fast, a shallow dive from the sun. Smart pilot. Classic bounce. He's firing. Chan shouted. Tracers arced across the sky, bright red lines that seemed lazy until you remembered they were moving at 3,000 feet per second. The Japanese 20mm rounds were explosive. Each one that connected would tear through aluminum like paper. O'Connor opened up first. His twin .50s hammered out a burst, ba-ba-ba-ba-bam, the sound deafening even through his leather helmet. The tracer stream reached out toward the fighter, and he walked it across the Frank's flight path, leading it, anticipating. Hits. He saw strikes on the fighter's cowling, sparks where bullets punched through metal. But the Frank kept coming. He's on us. Morrison screamed. The Japanese rounds hit Liberty Bell along the fuselage. Explosive 20mm shells detonated on impact. Boom, 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 and Dutch felt each hit like punches to the chest. Holes appeared in the fuselage. Something in the radio compartment exploded. Smoke filled the cabin. Then the Frank was past them, pulling up hard, climbing for another pass. Dama. GE report. Dutch shouted. Radio's gone, called the radio operator, Sergeant Phil Davies. Starboard waist gun took a hit. Morrison's bleeding. How bad? Shrapnel in the arm. He'll live. Keep him on that gun. Kowalski, cover Morrison's sector. The second Frank was making its run now, coming in from dead astern, the tail's 6 o'clock, Tommy Chen's position. The worst possible angle. Chen tracked the fighter in his sight. The tail gun position was the loneliest spot on AB-29, a small plexiglass bubble at the extreme rear of the aircraft, isolated from the rest of the crew. If the bomber went down, the tail gunner was usually the last to know and the first to die. But Chen had trained for this. He was from San Francisco, the son of immigrants, and he'd lied about his age to enlist at 17. This was his 12th mission. He'd shot down a Zero over Nagoya. He knew his job. "Come on," he muttered, watching the Frank grow larger in his sight. "Come on." The fighter fired. Tracers lanced toward him. Chan pressed his triggers. The twin .50s roared, and brass casings poured out of the ejection chutes like brass rain. His tracers reached out, a stream of fire converging with the Japanese stream, two lines of death meeting in midair. The Frank's windscreen exploded. Chen saw it. The plexiglass shattered, and the fighter suddenly jerked right, violent and uncontrolled. The pilot was dead or dying, and the Frank rolled inverted, trailing smoke, falling away toward the ocean 7 miles below. "Scratch one!" Chen shouted. Tail gun got him. But the first Frank was coming back around. And this time, he was going for the burning wing. Dutch saw the fighter lining up. The Japanese pilot knew what he was doing. Hit the fuel tanks, ignite the remaining fuel, blow the wing clean off. It was textbook. He's going for the wing. Left waist, right waist, both of you on him. Kowalski and Morrison, wounded but functioning, swung their guns. O'Connor in the top turret pivoted. 3 streams of .50 caliber tracers converged on the Frank as it bored in, and for a moment the sky was full of fire and lead and the desperate mathematics of survival. The Frank's right wing shredded. Fabric tore away. The aileron fluttered loose. But the Japanese pilot held his course, committed now, firing even as his aircraft came apart. His rounds hit the burning wing. Explosions rippled along the wing surface. The No. 2 engine, already damaged, exploded in a fireball. The propeller tore loose and spun away, end over end, falling toward the sea. Liberty Bell lurched. The entire aircraft shuddered. Dutch felt the bomber trying to roll left, the asymmetric thrust from the remaining engines fighting against the drag from the destroyed wing. "I'm losing it," he shouted. "Mitchell, help me." Both pilots hauled on the yoke. They stood on the right rudder pedal, forcing the bomber to counter the roll. The control cables groaned. Somewhere in the wing structure, metal screamed. The Frank pilot, his aircraft dying, pulled up at the last second and tried to climb away. But the damage was too much. The right wing folded. The fighter snap-rolled and exploded, a brief orange fireball that faded to black smoke. "He's down," O'Connor confirmed. Both bandits down. But Liberty Bell was barely flying. The left wing was now just a burning framework, more holes than metal. The No. 1 and 2 engines were gone. The No. 3 engine, the inboard left, was running rough, vibrating badly, probably damaged by shrapnel or heat. They had 2 good engines left. 2 engines to carry 60 tons of aircraft, fuel, and men across 300 miles of open ocean. Engineering to pilot. We've got structural failure developing. I can see the main spar cracking. Dutch, that wing's gonna fold. Dutch looked left. Through the cockpit window, he could see what Ray was describing. The main wing spar, the massive internal beam that carried all the load, was visibly bending. Hairline cracks were spreading along its surface like lightning. Metal fatigue, fire damage, and the stress of flight were all combining into a catastrophic equation. "How long?" Dutch asked, though he wasn't sure he wanted to know. "Could be 10 minutes. Could be 10 seconds. Then we fly for 11 minutes. Mitchell turned to stare at him. "Dutch, we need to ditch. Right now, while we still have some control. We're 60 miles from the nearest Allied submarine. Water's freezing. We'll last maybe 5 minutes before hypothermia. Better than burning. We're not burning. We're flying. We're dying." Dutch's voice dropped to something hard and cold. "We're flying, Lieutenant. And we're going to keep flying until we see friendly ships or we hit the goddamn water. Those are our choices. Choose." Mitchell swallowed, nodded. "Flying it is." The fire continued to spread. The wing continued to crack. Liberty Bell continued to climb, inches at a time, defying every law of physics and aviation, held together by skill and prayers and the stubborn will of 10 men who refused to accept the mathematics of their situation. Behind them, Tokyo burned, firestorms visible from 100 miles away, smoke rising to the stratosphere. Ahead lay the Pacific, gray and vast and indifferent. And somewhere between those two impossibilities, Liberty Bell flew on. 83 miles from the Japanese coast, the main spar began to fail. Dutch felt it before he heard it, a vibration that ran through the entire airframe, different from the normal engine harmonics, deeper and wrong. Then came the sound, a groan of tortured metal, followed by a sharp crack that made everyone on the intercom freeze. "That was the spar," Ray Wilson said from engineering, his voice flat. "Main structural member. It just fractured." "How bad?" Dutch asked, though his hands were already compensating, feeling the wing respond differently, feeling Liberty Bell change from an aircraft into something more fragile, more temporary. "Put it this way, we're flying on borrowed time. And the bank's about to call." The left wing was barely recognizable now. The outer third was completely gone, torn away by flak and fire. What remained was a skeletal structure wrapped in burning metal and held together by cables, prayers, and increasingly questionable engineering. The fire had consumed most of the wing's internal structure, and the weight of the remaining engines, plus the aerodynamic forces trying to rip the wing upward, was concentrating stress on the cracking spar. It was, by any rational analysis, impossible that they were still airborne. Dutch had the aircraft in a shallow descent now, trading altitude for distance. They'd reached 23,000 feet over the target. Now they were at 18,000 and dropping steadily. The mathematics were cruel. Every 1,000 feet down gave them another few miles of glide distance, but also brought them closer to the surface of an ocean that would kill them in minutes. "Navigation, where are we?" Dutch called. Lieutenant Marcus Webb, the navigator, was hunched over his charts and instruments in the small navigation station. He'd been frantically calculating their position using dead reckoning, their airspeed, heading, and wind drift, since the radio was destroyed. 140 miles from Iwo Jima. "But Dutch." Webb paused. "At our current speed and descent rate, we won't make it. Not even close." "How close?" "We'll hit water 60 miles short. Maybe 70 if we get lucky with the wind." The crew heard that. The intercom went silent. 70 miles. 70 miles might as well be 700 when you're in a life raft in the middle of the Pacific. "Pilot to crew," Dutch said. "Here's the situation. We can't make Iwo. We're gonna get as close as we can, then we ditch. We do this right, we all walk away. Navigation, you got the coordinates of the submarine picket line?" "Yes, sir." "If we can reach the outer edge of the search zone, we've got a chance of being spotted." "Then that's where we're going." Mitchell looked at Dutch. "You know what happens when we hit water with this wing. We're gonna cartwheel. Not if I can hold it level." "Dutch." "Gary, I need you sharp. I need everyone sharp. Crew, start the ditching checklist. Secure everything loose. Put on your Mae Wests. When I give the word, brace positions. We're going swimming, but we're doing it together, and we're doing it right." The crew moved into action. In the waist section, Kowalski and Morrison began tying down equipment, pulling the life rafts from their storage compartments, checking the CO2 cartridges. Morrison's arm was wrapped in a makeshift bandage, blood seeping through, but his hands were steady. Tommy Chen, in the tail, strapped himself in tighter and made peace with whatever happened next. He thought about his parents in San Francisco, about the letter he'd written before the mission, about whether they'd ever know what happened to him. O'Connor in the top turret said a prayer, the Lord's Prayer, the one his Irish mother taught him, and chambered a round in his .45 pistol. If they went down in Japanese waters, he wasn't going to be taken alive. The fire continued to burn, but paradoxically, it was starting to fade. There was simply less left to burn. The wing was consumed. The fuel tanks were empty or ruptured. What remained was mostly aluminum framework, and aluminum didn't burn, it melted. That was almost worse. The structural members, heated beyond their tolerance, were losing their strength. The spar, already cracked, was softening. "Dutch, I'm reading oil pressure drops on number 3, Mitchell said, monitoring the engine instruments. "Temps climbing too. We might lose it." "How long?" 10 minutes. "Maybe 20. Then we've got 20 minutes. Mark it. 15,000 feet. They were descending through scattered clouds now, and through gaps Dutch could see the Pacific below, endless gray-green water, whitecaps visible even from 3 miles up, cold and hostile and patient. "Radio check," Dutch called, knowing the answer. "Still dead," Davies confirmed. "Transmitters destroyed. We can't call for help." So they ditch, deploy their rafts, and hope. Hope that the submarine patrol spotted them. Hope that a passing B-29 saw their position. Hope that they didn't drift into Japanese waters where patrol boats would find them first. Hope was thin currency. Pilot to crew, 10 minutes to water. Start looking for ships. Anything. Freighters, destroyers, fishing boats, I don't care. If you see something, sing out. 10 pairs of eyes scanned the ocean below. Nothing. Just waves. The number 3 engine's oil pressure hit 0. "Three's done," Mitchell said. "Shutting it down." He pulled the mixture to idle cutoff and hit the feather button. The propeller blades rotated parallel to the airstream, reducing drag. The engine windmilled to a stop. 2 engines L. The Pacific Ocean was 48 degrees Fahrenheit that morning. The human body begins to lose core temperature in water below 70 degrees. At 48 degrees, you have maybe 30 minutes before hypothermia renders you unconscious. Maybe an hour before your heart stops. Dutch had been in the water for 7 minutes. His hands were already numb. His legs felt distant, disconnected. The Mae West life preserver kept his head above water, but the waves kept slapping his face, and each time he had to force his mouth shut, had to fight the urge to gasp and inhale seawater. Around him, his crew struggled toward the life rafts, bright orange circles that looked close but felt impossibly far. "Keep swimming," Dutch shouted, though his jaw was shaking so hard he could barely form words. "The boats are coming. Keep moving." Mitchell reached a raft first and hauled himself in, his wounded head leaving red streaks on the orange rubber. He turned immediately and reached for Hernandez, pulling the bombardier aboard. Then O'Connor. Then Davies. The other raft was 30 yards away. Kowalski got there, then Morrison, his wounded arm useless but his legs still kicking. Wilson pulled himself up, then reached down for Webb. Chen was struggling. The tail gunner had been thrown hard during the ditching, and his Mae West had torn. It was half inflated, barely keeping him up. He kicked weakly, coughing water, his young face pale with cold and fear. "Chen!" Dutch swam toward him, his own body screaming protest, hypothermia making every movement agonizingly slow. "I got you. Hold on." He reached the kid, grabbed his collar, started towing him toward the nearest raft. 10 yards. 20. The waves fought them. The cold fought them. Chen's lips were blue. "Stay with me, Tommy. Stay awake. That's an order. I'm trying." "Try harder." Hands reached down from the raft. Wilson and Morrison grabbed Chen, hauled him aboard, wrapped him in an emergency blanket. Then they reached for Dutch. He was too numb to climb. They had to drag him in like a caught fish, and he lay on the bottom of the raft, shivering violently, tasting salt and blood and bile. "Rescue boats!" someone shouted. "They're almost here." Dutch forced himself up on one elbow. Through waves and spray, he could see them, 2 motor launches from the Hazelwood, cutting white wakes through the gray water, coming fast. Behind them, the destroyer itself loomed like a steel cliff, getting larger. The first launch reached them 3 minutes later. Navy sailors in cold weather gear pulled the rafts alongside, started transferring survivors. They moved with practiced efficiency: blankets, hot coffee from thermoses, medical checks. A young ensign grabbed Dutch's arm. "How many aboard the aircraft, sir?" "10. Dutch's voice was barely a whisper. "All present. All alive." "Jesus Christ," the ensign breathed. "We saw you coming in. We thought, sir, we thought nobody was walking away from that." "We didn't walk. We swam." They pulled Chen aboard last. The kid was unconscious now, deep in hypothermia. A Navy corpsman immediately started warming protocols: blankets, heat packs, warm 4 fluids. "He gonna make it?" Dutch asked. "If we get him inside in the next 10 minutes, yeah. Kid's tough." The launch raced back to the Hazelwood. Dutch sat wrapped in a wool blanket, shaking, watching the spot where Liberty Bell had gone down. There was nothing left: no debris, no oil slick, no evidence that a 60-ton aircraft had even been there. The ocean had swallowed her completely. On the destroyer's deck, they were carried below to the sick bay. The ship's doctor, a tired-looking commander named Patterson, examined each man. Morrison's arm needed stitches. Mitchell's head wound required bandaging. Chen was placed in a bunk with heated blankets and monitored constantly. Everyone had hypothermia to varying degrees. Everyone had bruises, cuts, sprains. But everyone would live. Dutch sat on a bunk, wrapped in blankets, holding a mug of coffee he couldn't yet grip properly. His hands trembled too badly. A sailor held it for him, helped him drink. Captain Anderson of the Hazelwood came down to sick bay. He was a career Navy man, maybe 50, with gray at his temples and eyes that had seen too much war. "Captain Schultz," he said. "Hell of a landing. Hell of a mess is what it was. My deck officer said your left wing was gone. Said you were on fire. Said you flew that wreck 60 miles over open ocean." Dutch didn't answer. What was there to say? Anderson sat down. "We're headed to Iwo Jima. Get you and your boys proper medical attention, get you debriefed, and get you home. Your war's over, son." "What about Tokyo?" "Tokyo." Anderson's expression darkened. "Tokyo's burning. 16 square miles. Maybe 100,000 dead, maybe more. Worst fire raid in history. Strategic bombing, they call it." He paused. "What do you call it?" Dutch looked at the coffee in his mug. "I call it Tuesday." Anderson nodded slowly, stood up, left. Over the next 4 hours, as the Hazelwood steamed for Iwo Jima, the crew of Liberty Bell gathered in the crew's mess. They sat together, not saying much, just being present. The bond between them was something civilians would never understand. The knowledge that they'd seen hell together and come back, that they'd trusted each other with their lives, and that trust had been earned. Chen woke up around 1,400 hours. He was groggy, confused, wrapped in about 6 blankets. "Did I get him?" he asked. "The Frank. Did I get him?" "You got him, kid," O'Connor confirmed. "Blew him out of the sky." "Good." Chen closed his eyes again. "Don't wanna do that again. None of us do." 3 days later, they were at Iwo Jima. The volcanic island was ugly and brutal, still scarred from the marine assault 2 months prior. But it had runways and hospitals and, most importantly, aircraft heading back to the States. Dutch was in the debriefing room with a full colonel from 20th Air Force Intelligence. The colonel looked skeptical. "Let me get this straight, Captain. Your aircraft sustained catastrophic damage over the target. You lost 2 engines and approximately 40% of your left wing structure. You flew for 80-plus miles, fought off 2 fighters, and successfully ditched near a rescue vessel with 0 casualties." "That's correct, sir. That's impossible. With respect, sir, we did it anyway." The colonel made notes. We're recommending you and your crew for the Distinguished Flying Cross. Possibly the Silver Star for you personally." Dutch shook his head. "Sir, we just did our job. Your job was to bomb Tokyo and come home. You did both. That's not just doing your job, Captain. That's exceptional." Dutch thought about Liberty Bell, about the B-29 that had carried them through 17 missions and died getting them through the 18th. He thought about the city of Tokyo, about the fires, about the 100,000 dead. He thought about Memphis Belle too, the bomber that had died over the target, spinning down with its crew still aboard. "Sir, with respect, there's nothing exceptional about surviving. The exceptional thing would have been if nobody had to die at all." The colonel looked at him for a long moment. "You're a good man, Captain Schultz. But this is war. Good men die. The exceptional part is that you saved 10. Dutch was flown home in early April 1945. He arrived in Ohio on a cloudy morning that smelled like rain and fresh earth. Eleanor met him at the train station, and when she saw him, thinner, older, with shadows in his eyes that hadn't been there before, she just held him and cried. His daughter, Elizabeth, was 3 years old. She didn't recognize him at first, this strange man in uniform who her mother said was Daddy. But Dutch picked her up and held her, and she smelled like soap and innocence, and he wept. The war ended in August. The atomic bombs, weapons beyond imagining, fell on Hiroshima and Nagasaki. Japan surrendered. The fires finally stopped. Dutch never flew again. He couldn't. Every time he heard an aircraft engine, he was back in Liberty Bell's cockpit, fighting the yoke, watching his wing burn. He took a job at a manufacturing plant, went to church on Sundays, raised his daughter, and tried to forget. But he never could forget. Not completely. The crew stayed in touch. Annual letters at Christmas. Occasional phone calls. In 1952, they held a reunion in Chicago. All 10 of them, still alive, still bound by that one morning over Tokyo when they defied death together. They talked about everything except the mission. They talked about their wives, their kids, their jobs, their dreams. They talked about baseball and politics and the weather. They didn't talk about Tokyo. They didn't talk about the fires. They didn't talk about the wing that shouldn't have held or the water that should have killed them. Some things were too big for words. Chen became an engineer. Morrison became a teacher. O'Connor went back to Boston and ran a pub. One by one, they built lives from the wreckage of war. Dutch died in 1989, 69 years old, peacefully in his sleep. At his funeral, the remaining crew members came. Old men now, white-haired and stooped, but still carrying themselves with the bearing of men who'd once climbed out of hell. They buried him with full military honors. The flag on his coffin was precisely folded. The 3-rifle salute echoed across the cemetery. Taps played in the distance, mournful and clear. And somewhere in the deep Pacific, 6 miles down where sunlight never reaches, Liberty Bell rested on the ocean floor, her aluminum skin corroded, her engine silent, her name still visible on the crumpled nose. She'd done her job. She'd brought her crew home. Some aircraft are just machines, metal and rivets and engineering. But some are more. Some are promises kept. Some are the difference between 10 men living and 10 men dying. Liberty Bell was one of those. The fire had consumed her. The ocean had taken her. But her crew, her 10 survivors, carried her memory forward, proof that courage and skill and desperate determination could, sometimes, defy the mathematics of death. They'd climbed out of Flak with a shredded wing and a burning fuselage, and they'd made it home. Against all odds. Against all reason. They'd made it home. And that, in the end, was the only thing that mattered.